Cabernet Sauvignon is a very complex variety, arguably one of the most complex varieties, which makes it one of the best varieties for making red wine. So what you look for, and it's also very tannic, it's got great levels of natural tannin, natural acidity. So what you want is not necessarily a wine that is immediately approachable, but you want something that's got the balance, the structure, I don't really like to use the word minerality, but there's a sort of mineral streak running through it, and grip. Grip is very often a term that I use with port, where it sort of grabs you, but the potential for structure of the great cabs, you can talk in terms of grip, that it's something that holds you. It's a framework of acid and tannin. We're not talking about raw tannin. We're talking about small-grained, very resolved tannins, but nevertheless a strong tannin and strong acid base to support the fruit. In many ways, great Cabernet feels no bigger than medium body, but yet in many ways it's really big in terms of the stuffing of Cabernet Sauvignon. I could get really poetical about this.
Good morning and welcome to the Brander Vineyard. We are here to do a tasting exercise with a focus on Cabernet Sauvignon. The format is a blind tasting with 15 wines representing 8 different countries and 14 different regions altogether. All the classic regions of the world making Cabernet Sauvignon are included, along with 2 local cabs from the Santa Ynez Valley. The purpose of this tasting is to explore the differences and commonalities among the wines with the goal of arriving at a better understanding of what makes Cabernet Cabernet. That's why a global context is really the best way to go to give you more information. This is not a beauty contest. It is an exercise in identifying the main attributes and expressions of Cabernet Sauvignon. Now, today we have helping us with this task 2 masters of wine, Peter Koff and Patrick Farrell. I have also invited on the panel 2 members of our local wine community, Jeff Labard, who's the winemaker at Gainey Vineyard, and Alfredo Koch, who's the director of the enology program at Allen Hancock College. The one region that's duplicated twice is the Santa Ynez Valley, the Los Olivos area here. And that is not a classic region yet, but hopefully maybe it will be.
How about if I just hit upon what some taste characteristics I'd be looking for in the wines, and then when we do the first 4 blind, it'll give you hopefully a thing or two to hang your hat on. The wines of Mendoza frequently have a similar weight to the wines from the Napa Valley. Okay, fairly ripe Cabernet Sauvignon, but it's at altitudes. Those wines tend to be a bit more tannic. Some of the tannins aren't quite as ripe and round as they are in the Napa Valley, but they ripen Cabernet Sauvignon pretty well. Coonawarra, I'm just going straight down the list. Coonawarra is a cool region in Australia, and Coonawarra's Cabernet varies substantially from vintage to vintage. If it's not a ripe vintage for them, the wines can be lean and green. Otherwise, there can be a wonderful purity of cassis fruit in the Coonawarra wines. Moderate alcohol, 13.5. Can have some green notes. The Margaret River in Australia is a bit warmer, though not too warm, so it gets riper. There's a fuller mid palate. Those wines frequently have some tobacco or cigar box on them. Frequently are a very similar weight to wines from Bordeaux. Chile, here in California, we get cooling influence from the Pacific Ocean. Right? The surface temperature of the Pacific tends to be cooler than at a given latitude than the Atlantic is, certainly during the growing season. So in Chile, it's the same thing. They have, their Pacific is cool just like ours is, but they get cooling influence as well from the Andes Mountains. So you get this cooling influence from the ocean and the mountains, and because of that, the wines can paradoxically both be ripe and unripe at the same time. Ripe in that they have nice cassis fruit, ripe in that they have 13.5, 14% alcohol, but unripe in that there can be a green, leafy characteristic. Peter was the one who coined it to me. There's a quince characteristic to many of the Chilean wines. Some people describe it as minty as well. Stellenbosch is pretty warm, produces world-class Cabernet Sauvignon, can be quite ripe, and many of the red wines in South Africa have a iodine characteristic to them that we use as a marker to say, hey, that wine is speaking, and that is from South Africa. Santa Ynez Valley, here, the wines have, I think it's similar to ripe Coonawarra, a wonderful purity of Cabernet Sauvignon fruit, though perhaps a bit more rounded than the wines of Coonawarra. Round, very nice cassis fruit characteristic. Napa Valley wines, again, tend to be riper, can have more of that cherry characteristic than cassis characteristic, and there's been a tendency in the Napa Valley for people to get hung up on hang time and the wines having higher alcohol levels, frequently 14.5% to 16%. Santa Cruz Mountains, again, depending upon where one is in altitude, the wines can vary quite a bit in terms of ripeness. When they're at their best, can have a structure similar to Bordeaux, but with better cassis purity of fruit. Washington State claims to be everything Bordeaux except being New World, but that's more marketing than reality. The Washington State wines can have ripeness levels similar to Napa at times, and at other times be somewhat intermediate between Napa and the Santa Ynez Valley. Tend to have very nice purity fruit. Some of the wines can have some hard tannins because they like to stress the wines by withholding irrigation. Grave region and Bordeaux is Cabernet based, though usually with a good healthy dose of Merlot in it. The Merlot in Bordeaux frequently gives a leather characteristic, and these wines tend to be in the realm of Cabernet-based Bordeaux wines among the softer side of Cabernet-based Bordeaux wines. The Médoc is the home of Cabernet Sauvignon, and depending upon exactly where in the Médoc the wines come from, they can be fairly powerful with, if they're usually at this quality level have a fair amount of Tosi French oak, there can be a brioche characteristic to them along with cassis fruit, some minerality. Saint-Emilion is going to be Cabernet Franc and Merlot based. Those wines can be very rich, fuller mid-palate than the Cabernet Sauvignon based wines. They tend to have a bit of perfume from the Cabernet Franc. Italy can be, and Tuscany can be very similar to the Napa Valley, perhaps a bit more restrained, but can have a similar flavor profile. And the Peñedes, again, a tad riper than Italy, though a lot of variation.
I think the greenness on Cabernet has to be looked at two ways. Is it green, which is a varietal characteristic, slightly green? Or is it green because you haven't farmed it correctly, or you have picked it unripe, or you didn't expose the bunches enough? I think there's one part of the green which says, I know that's a friend, and there's another green which says they did something wrong here. Mm-hmm. And usually you don't even need all that much experience to pick out which of those it is. And so I think if you read classic descriptions of Cabernet Sauvignon, one way or another, there's always something. We don't want capsicum, we don't want green peppers necessarily, but there's always something like a bit of herbaceousness, or something, the words that they use. And I think to get them completely gone is possible, but to lose other things that the Cabernet can bring to the table. And we don't want aggressive green, but we need to expect just some.
On behalf of my fellow panelists, right, I'd like to thank Fred for putting this together.
Well, thank you, Pat. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, you guys. All, I mean, this has been a good. I've been thinking about doing this for a while, so it's good. But we got some more stuff, I got a couple of magnums. I actually got a magnum of 73 My Comets. I've been chomping at the bits to open up. I don't know if it's any good, but it's not going to get any better, so we're going to open it up among some other stuff.